The sun had just started to rise when James arrived at the company gates, his cleaning cart rattling quietly beside him, the cool morning air filled with the smell of wet grass and metal. It was another long day at the city's biggest corporation, a place where everyone wore suits and looked too busy to notice a man like him. James had been cleaning those glass walls and shiny floors for 8 years, yet to most people inside he was invisible. They passed by him as if he were part of the furniture, not a man with a family or a life of his own. That morning his son Malik walked beside him, his small hand clutching his father's lunchbox. Malik was only 12, but his eyes saw everything. He was smart, always asking questions about how machines worked or why people acted like they did. James often told him, "Son, people like us must work twice as hard just to be seen." Malik didn't understand it fully, but he could feel it. The way guards looked at them differently, or how no one said good morning to his father even when he greeted them kindly. The company parking lot was already filling up with expensive cars. Shiny silver sedans, sleek black SUVs, and one bright red sports car that stood out like fire among clouds. Malik's eyes followed that red car. He'd never seen something like it up close before. The way its engine hummed low, the way it gleamed under the sun, it almost looked alive. But something about it didn't feel right. James pushed his mop bucket through the main lobby while Malik waited outside. The boy watched as more employees arrived, laughing, chatting, carrying their coffee cups. Everyone looked so sure of themselves. He sat on a small concrete barrier, kicking his feet softly against the ground, just watching. The red car's door was still locked. Its lights blinked once. Malik frowned. He leaned a little closer, curiosity sparking in his young mind. Under the car's shadow, something caught his attention, a small wire, almost invisible, hanging just below the driver's seat area. At first, he thought it might be part of the car's design, but then he saw a tiny red light blink. Once. Twice. His heart skipped. It didn't look like any car part he'd seen before. He crouched lower, his face pale. He'd seen enough action movies with his dad at home to know what blinking red lights usually meant. Trouble. Inside the building, James was wiping down the reception counter, humming softly to himself. His mind was on the bills he needed to pay, the groceries that were running low and Malik's school fees that were still pending. He didn't notice his son standing outside, frozen in fear. Malik swallowed hard. He looked around, but nobody seemed to care. A few guards were chatting near the gate, not even glancing his way. One of them looked up briefly, then went back to scrolling on his datapad. The boy's palms grew sweaty. He wanted to run inside to call his father, but something inside him said there wasn't time. The light blinked again, then he shouted. His voice cracked but was loud enough to echo through the parking area. "That car's a trap," he yelled, pointing at the red vehicle. His voice cut through the morning noise like a siren. Heads turned. For a moment, everyone went still. A woman carrying her briefcase stopped mid-step. The guards frowned. James heard the shout and dropped his mop, rushing outside in panic. When he saw Malik standing there, pointing, he felt both confusion and fear. "Malik, what are you doing?" he cried, grabbing his son's shoulders. But Malik's voice was trembling with urgency. "Dad, there's something under that car." "It's blinking." The guards exchanged annoyed looks. One of them chuckled. "Kid, go home. Don't start nonsense this early." The employees began whispering and giggling. Some even took out their phones to record, thinking it was funny. The cleaner's kid trying to act like a hero. James felt the heat of embarrassment burning in his chest. He tried to hush his son, but Malik pushed his hand away and shouted again, louder this time. "I'm telling the truth. That car is dangerous." For a moment, silence fell. Everyone looked at the red car. The little light blinked once more, and the faint sound of a ticking noise followed. The laughter faded. Malik's words now carried a strange weight. One of the security guards frowned and slowly approached the car, bending down to look. James stood frozen, holding his son close, heart pounding. He didn't know whether to scold Malik or thank him. All he could do was watch. The guard's face turned from annoyance to horror as he stepped back quickly, shouting for everyone to move away. The parking lot erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran in all directions. Alarms began to blare. Malik clung to his father's arm as security pulled them back. James couldn't believe what was happening. His son, his quiet, curious boy, had just saved dozens of people. And yet all he could think about was how close they had come to disaster. In that one morning, everything changed. The same people who ignored them every day had now heard the voice they once overlooked. Malik's warning would echo long after the smoke cleared. The cleaner's son had shouted, and the world had finally listened. Malik's voice still echoed in the air long after the chaos had begun. The parking lot was cordoned off with yellow tape, and officers swarmed the place shouting orders into radios. Sirens wailed from every direction, mixing with the heavy breathing of frightened workers. But amid the noise and confusion, one small boy stood trembling beside his father, his heart still pounding like a drum. He had shouted with all his strength, yet part of him couldn't believe anyone had finally listened. James kept his hand tightly on Malik's shoulder, afraid someone might blame his son for the commotion. He saw how the guards who had laughed moments ago now spoke nervously into their comms, their faces pale. The same executives who used to walk past him like he was invisible now looked shaken, scared, and most of all, ashamed. A few even glanced at Malik, as if trying to process how a child could see what a whole team of professionals had missed. A tall man in a dark uniform approached. His chest badge read, Chief Inspector Harlan. He crouched down to Malik's eye level, his voice firm but kind. Son, tell me exactly what you saw, he said. Malik swallowed hard, his small hands trembling. I saw something under the car, he said softly. It had wires and a red light blinking, just once. Then again. Harlan nodded slowly, signaling to a bomb technician standing nearby. Good eyes, kid, he said. You just saved a lot of lives today. The technician crawled under the car, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Everyone watched in tense silence. The minutes felt like hours. Then came the words that froze every heartbeat. It's real. It's a live device. Panic erupted again, but Harlan's commanding voice cut through the noise. Evacuate the building. Clear the lot now. Malik and James were pushed back behind a barricade as the bomb squad moved in with heavy gear. James's hands were shaking. He looked down at Malik. His son was quiet now, staring at the flashing lights and armored vehicles that filled the once normal morning. You did good, son, James whispered, his throat tight. You did real good, but Malik didn't smile. His eyes were full of questions. Dad, he said softly, why did they laugh at me first? If I hadn't shouted twice, would they still be there? James didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell his son that people sometimes ignore truth when it comes from someone small. He wanted to say the world doesn't always listen to those it looks down on. But instead he just held him close and said, What matters is you spoke up. That's what makes a man brave. A few minutes later, a sudden explosion shook the air. Not from the car, but from a controlled detonation. The bomb squad had safely neutralized the device. Smoke rose like a ghost from the wreckage, and everyone stood silent again, realizing what could have happened if Malik hadn't spoken. The company's CEO arrived in his black car just in time to see the chaos. He stepped out looking angry at first, but then he saw the ruined red vehicle and the police everywhere. His face turned pale. Who found it? The CEO demanded. No one spoke. Finally, Chief Harlan turned and pointed toward Malik. He did, he said simply. The CEO blinked in disbelief. That child? Malik looked down, shy and uneasy. The man walked over, his expensive shoes crunching on broken glass. You saw it before anyone else? He asked. Malik nodded. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt, he whispered. The CEO stared at him for a long moment, his pride melting into shame. And we laughed at you, he said under his breath. Then he turned to his guards, his voice cold. Next time a child warns you about something, you listen. As the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers spread everywhere. About the boy who had seen what no one else did. About the cleaner whose son saved the whole company. News reporters were already outside the gates, cameras flashing, asking questions. But Malik didn't care about fame. He just wanted to go home with his father, eat the lunch they had packed, and sit in peace. That night, James tucked him into bed, his heart full of pride and fear mixed together. You know, son, he said softly, sometimes being brave means being laughed at first. Malik smiled sleepily, his voice fading as he replied, Then I'll never be scared to shout again. Dad. Outside their window, city lights flickered like tiny red dots, harmless ones this time. But deep inside that company, behind closed doors, something had changed. The next morning, people would whisper not about profits or losses, but about the boy who saw the truth. and the day his voice silenced an entire company. The next morning, the company tried to return to normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. The smell of smoke still hung faintly in the air, and yellow tape still fluttered across one corner of the parking lot. The red sports car, once a symbol of pride for the CEO, had been towed away, its burned metal shell leaving a dark mark on the concrete. Yet the real mark was left inside every person who had been there that morning. People walked slower. They spoke softer, and for the first time they looked at James the cleaner and his son Malik, not with ignorance but with something new: respect and guilt. But not everyone accepted what had happened easily. Some workers whispered behind their hands, their pride refusing to let a child take the spotlight. "It was luck," one man muttered. "The kid just guessed." Another scoffed, "Bomb, please." The police probably planted it to look like heroes. Their voices dripped with jealousy because deep down they knew the truth. Malik had done what none of them had. James noticed the looks. He had been a quiet man all his life, used to being invisible. But now attention made him uneasy. He tried to keep his head down and do his work as usual, mopping the marble floor while people stared. Malik sat on a nearby chair waiting for his father to finish. Every few minutes someone would walk by and whisper, "That's the boy." Some smiled kindly. Others just stared as if he were some strange creature they couldn't understand. At lunchtime, the CEO called an emergency staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the main hall. Cleaners, guards, managers, even the kitchen staff. Malik sat beside his father in the back corner, feeling small among the sea of polished shoes and expensive suits. The CEO stood on stage, his face still pale from yesterday's shock. "Before we begin," he said into the microphone, "there is someone we owe our lives to." Every head turned as he pointed toward Malik. This young boy noticed what all our systems, guards, and professionals missed. Because of his courage, we are standing here today. The hall fell silent. No applause yet, just silence thick with emotion. James felt tears burning behind his eyes. Malik stared at the floor, nervous and shy. He didn't like attention. He didn't understand why everyone looked so serious. Finally, someone began to clap. One of the secretaries quietly at first. Then another joined. Soon the whole hall erupted in applause. The sound filled the air like thunder echoing through glass walls. James placed his hand on Malik's shoulder. The boy looked up at his father, his face glowing softly. He smiled, not with pride but with relief. After the meeting, reporters crowded outside the building. Cameras flashed, microphones waved, questions flew like arrows. "How did you know it was a bomb? Were you scared? Do you feel like a hero?" Malik clung to his father's arm, overwhelmed. James shielded him, politely refusing to answer. He didn't want fame. He only wanted his son to stay safe and normal. But the world had already chosen their story. Later that day, while the crowd thinned, one of the executives, a man named Harris, approached James in the hallway. His face carried a forced smile. "Quite a story you've got there," he said. "Must feel nice finally being noticed." James didn't like his tone. "My son did what anyone should have done," he replied calmly. Harris leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "Anyone? You think a child outsmarted trained adults by accident? Maybe you planned it, huh? Maybe this was all for attention." James froze. Malik, who was holding his father's hand, stepped back, confused. "Sir," James said softly, his voice steady but tight, "you can think what you want, but I clean your mess every day. Yesterday my son cleaned something bigger, your arrogance." Harris flinched, his smirk fading. Without another word, he turned and walked away. That night, Malik sat on their small apartment balcony staring at the stars. He could still hear the applause, still see the flashing lights of cameras. But in his heart, he felt heavy. "Dad," he said quietly, "why do people hate when someone does the right thing?" James thought for a long moment before answering. "Because truth makes proud people feel small," he said. "But don't ever let that stop you from speaking it." In the distance, the city lights blinked like watchful eyes, and Malik made a silent promise that he'd never be afraid to speak again, even if the whole world laughed first. The company might try to forget what happened, but deep down, every single person there knew one truth. The day the cleaner's son shouted, everything changed. And the ones who mocked him would never forget the sound of his voice, the voice that saved them all. The next few days passed in a haze of reporters, flashing cameras, and endless phone calls. The story of the cleaner's son who saved a company had spread across the city like wildfire. News anchors repeated Malik's name again and again, showing his small, nervous smile on every screen. But behind the headlines and applause, a quiet storm was brewing, the kind that hid in whispers and cold stares. Inside the company, security was tighter than ever. Every car was scanned, every bag checked, and every visitor questioned. But even with all the new measures, something else was broken. Trust. The workers no longer laughed in the hallways. Everyone was watching everyone else. The air felt heavy with guilt and unease. James noticed it immediately. He had always been invisible, but now he could feel every eye following him as he pushed his mop through the corridors. Malik, meanwhile, stayed mostly by his father's side after school. The once bright boy had grown quieter. People praised him too much too often. Every compliment felt strange, almost fake. "They're not clapping for me," he told his father one evening. "They're clapping because they're scared." James sighed and nodded. "You're right, son. Fear makes people pretend." That same night, something unusual happened. Chief Inspector Harlan returned to the company, this time without his uniform. He looked serious, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. He asked to speak to James and Malik privately. They sat in a small break room, 3 chairs, a flickering light, and a silence thick enough to hear the clock ticking. "We found something," Harlan began. "That device wasn't random. Whoever planted it knew this place well, too well." James frowned. "You mean someone from inside?" Harlan nodded slowly. "Possibly. The wiring, the timing, the placement. It was designed to explode right when the CEO's car started. Whoever did this had access and detailed knowledge of the company's layout." Malik's eyes widened. "But why, sir?" he asked softly. Harlan leaned forward. "Because when people want power, they destroy what they can't control." The room fell silent. James felt a chill crawl up his spine. He remembered Harris, the executive who had accused him days ago. The way his voice carried both anger and fear, something about it didn't sit right. "Do you have suspects?" James asked. Harlan gave a thin smile. "A few, but that's not why I'm here." "I came to warn you." "Warn us?" Malik asked. Harlan nodded. "People don't like when truth comes from the wrong place. You're heroes to some, but a problem to others. If anyone asks questions about that day, tell them nothing. Let us handle it." James exchanged a worried glance with his son. "Are we in danger?" he asked. Harlan paused for a moment, then said quietly, "Let's just say some people wish you hadn't looked under that car." Later that night, as they walked home under dim streetlights, Malik clutched his father's hand tighter. "Dad," he whispered, "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to help." James stopped and knelt down beside him. "You didn't cause trouble, son. You revealed it. That's different." He smiled faintly, brushing Malik's hair back. "You saw what no one else wanted to see, and that's the hardest kind of truth. But danger has a way of returning quietly." 2 days later, James found a note taped to his locker. The paper was wet, the ink smudged, but the message was clear. "Keep quiet. Heroes die early." James froze. His hands shook as he read it again and again. Malik noticed his father's pale face that evening and asked what was wrong, but James lied, saying it was just a bill. He didn't want to scare his son, yet that night he couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, felt like a warning. Meanwhile, at the company, the investigation deepened. Files were missing. CCTV footage from the day of the explosion had mysteriously vanished. Harlan's team suspected an insider leak, and the only person who had seen anything unusual, the boy who shouted, was now the one everyone was watching quietly from the shadows. Then, on Friday morning when James arrived at work, something strange happened. The entire building went silent as he entered. Employees moved aside. The CEO himself was waiting in the lobby, flanked by 2 officers. "Mr. James," he said with a tight smile. "We need to talk." For a moment, James's heart stopped. Malik stood beside him, clutching his father's sleeve, confused and frightened. The CEO gestured toward the conference room. "It's about what we discovered last night," he said, his voice low. "And it might change everything you think you know about this company." The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that made hearts beat louder. James realized something. The story that had made his son a hero wasn't over yet. It was only beginning, and this time, The truth hiding behind the walls might be darker than James sat across from the CEO in a cold, glass-walled meeting room. The blinds were drawn and 2 police officers stood quietly by the door. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound for a long time. Malik sat beside his father, his small legs swinging nervously, eyes darting between the adults. The CEO's face looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, sweat glistening on his forehead. He wasn't the confident man everyone saw on stage. Now he looked afraid. "Mr. James," the CEO began softly, "you've been a loyal worker here for 8 years. Never caused trouble, never even raised your voice. That's why I'm asking you this directly." He leaned forward. "Have you noticed anything strange in the last month? Anyone staying late? Anyone watching you or your son?" James frowned, unsure how to answer. No, sir. We just come here, do our job, and leave. I don't talk to many people." The CEO nodded, then slid a tablet across the table. "Then you need to see this." On the screen was a security recording, grainy black and white footage from the parking lot the morning of the explosion. James recognized himself walking toward the building, pushing his mop cart. Behind him, Malik was visible, stopping near the red car. But then the screen flickered. For less than a second, a tall figure appeared behind another vehicle, crouched near the CEO's car. The angle was poor, but James could see gloved hands, quick movements, and something metallic glinting in the light. "That's the person who planted the bomb," the CEO said grimly. "But here's the problem. The footage was deleted from our servers that same afternoon. The only copy we found was from an external backup, hidden under a fake directory. Someone tried to erase it." Malik's eyes widened. "So someone inside the company did it," he whispered. The CEO nodded slowly. "Yes, and we think whoever it was might still be here." A cold silence fell. James's heartbeat quickened. "But why would they?" He started, but Harlan, who stood behind the CEO, interrupted. "Money, power, maybe revenge. Maybe something worse. We traced the deleted logs to a senior executive's account. But before we could question him, he vanished." James felt a chill crawl through him. He remembered Harris, the arrogant man who had accused him earlier. His smirk, his eyes, his threats. "Harris," James said quietly. "It's him, isn't it?" The CEO didn't respond directly, but his silence said enough. "We're looking for him," Harlan said. "He withdrew all his funds and disappeared 2 nights ago. We have reason to believe he wasn't working alone." Malik's hand gripped his father's tightly. "Dad," he whispered, "are we safe?" James forced a smile, but his voice was unsteady. "We will be, son. We will." Just then, a loud crash echoed through the hallway outside. One of the officers rushed to the door, hand on his weapon. The second officer whispered into his radio. The CEO's face went pale. "What's happening?" he asked. The door burst open, and chaos followed. A security guard stumbled in, blood on his sleeve, gasping, "He's here, Harris, he's in the building." The officer dragged him inside, slamming the door shut. Malik jumped, eyes wide in terror. Outside, footsteps thundered down the hall, and the sound of gunfire echoed faintly from the distance. Harlan pulled his sidearm. "Get down," he barked. He peered through the blinds, scanning the corridor. A shadow moved past the frosted glass, fast, deliberate, determined. Then came a voice, muffled but filled with rage. "You think you can expose me? You think a cleaner and his brat can destroy me?" Malik froze. The voice was unmistakable. Harris. James pulled his son under the table as Harlan and the officers took position near the door. The CEO crouched behind his desk, trembling. The next moment shattered the silence, a single gunshot, then another. Glass exploded across the floor. A bullet whizzed past Harlan's shoulder and embedded itself in the wall. Malik whimpered softly, covering his ears. Harlan returned fire, shouting, "Drop your weapon, Harris." But the voice outside only laughed, a dry, bitter laugh full of madness. "Do you know what I built here? Do you know how much they paid me to keep this secret? And now it's gone. Because of a janitor's kid." Another shot. Another crash. James held Malik close, whispering, "Don't look. Just stay down." Then everything went still. The hallway fell silent again. Harlan moved carefully to the door, motioning the others to stay back. He swung it open slowly, and there, lying on the floor, was Harris, his gun beside him, his face pale and still. The officers moved in. Harlan checked his pulse. "He's gone," he said quietly. "Looks like his own bullet ricocheted." The CEO slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The tension in the room broke at last, replaced by heavy breaths and trembling relief. Malik crawled out from under the table, still shaking. "Dad," he whispered, "why would someone do all this? Just for power?" James knelt and hugged him tightly. "Some men would rather destroy everything than admit they're wrong," he said softly. "But not you. You spoke when no one else dared to. That's real strength." Harlan holstered his gun and looked at Malik. "You didn't just save a company, kid," he said. "You saved every person in it twice." Malik looked down, shy and silent. As they left the building, the sun was rising, pale and cold, cutting through the smoke-filled air. Reporters were already outside again, shouting questions, flashing cameras. But James didn't stop this time. He just held Malik's hand and kept walking. Because he knew something no headline could ever say. The bravest voice in the world didn't belong to the rich or the powerful. It belonged to his son, the boy who shouted the truth when no one else would listen. The city woke up the next morning to breaking news that shook everyone. Corporate executive Harris found dead after failed attack. Cleaner's son saves dozens again. The headline glowed across every screen in town. Reporters repeated Malik's name like a legend now, the boy who saw what others couldn't. But inside James's small apartment, things were far from glorious. Malik sat quietly by the window watching police cars patrol below. He hadn't spoken much since last night. His eyes carried a weight too heavy for a 12-year-old. James brought him breakfast, bread and milk, but Malik only pushed it around his plate. "You should eat," James said softly. "You need strength." Malik didn't look up. "Dad," he whispered, "I didn't want anyone to die. I just wanted to stop something bad." His voice trembled. "Does shouting the truth always hurt people?" James sighed and sat beside him. "Sometimes," he said. "But silence hurts even more. You did what was right, son. What happened after wasn't your fault." He tried to smile, but his heart was heavy too. Outside, a car pulled up. 2 men in black suits stepped out. One was Chief Harlan. James opened the door before they could knock. "Morning," Harlan greeted, his tone calm but serious. "We need to talk. May we come in?" They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from untouched tea. "James Malik," Harlan began, "what happened last night wasn't the end. The more we dig, the worse it gets." He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were photos, blueprints, security badges, coded memos. Harris wasn't working alone. There's someone else and someone higher. James leaned forward. "You mean above Harris?" Harlan nodded. "Yes, we found bank transfers linked to an overseas account, all under a false name. That money didn't come from competitors. It came from inside the company. Someone powerful wanted that bomb planted, and they used Harris to do it." Malik frowned. "But why would they want to destroy their own company?" "Insurance fraud," Harlan explained grimly. "A staged tragedy to cover stolen millions. If that car exploded with the CEO inside, the culprit could vanish rich and free. Harris panicked when you ruined the plan." James clenched his fists. "So the danger isn't over." "No," Harlan replied. "Whoever's behind this still thinks you two know too much." A knock at the door interrupted them, sharp, impatient. James froze. Harlan motioned for silence. He drew his gun and opened the door a crack. A delivery man stood there holding a small package. "Delivery for Mr. James," he said casually. No sender name, no address. Just James's name scrawled in black marker. Harlan took the box, his instincts screaming. He ordered everyone to step back. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was no bomb this time, but a small phone and a note that said, "He was only the beginning." Malik's face went pale. "Dad, what does that mean?" Harlan's jaw tightened. "It means whoever did this isn't done." That afternoon, the police escorted James and Malik to a safe house outside the city. It was a quiet place surrounded by trees and silence, a small cabin with only the sound of wind brushing the leaves. For the first time in weeks, there were no cameras, no reporters, no curious eyes. But peace felt thin, fragile, like glass ready to crack. At night, Malik couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the stars again, the same stars he used to dream under before everything changed. "Dad," he said softly, "why does it feel like truth makes enemies?" James looked up from the old armchair, tired but steady. "Because truth makes liars afraid," he said. "But remember, son, fear means you've already beaten them once." Suddenly the quiet was broken by a faint noise outside. A twig snapped. James stood, his muscles tense. "Stay inside," he whispered, stepping to the door. Harlan, sleeping in the next room, was already awake, his gun in hand. The three of them moved silently toward the window. Through the glass, a figure stood near the tree line, motionless, watching. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to feel the danger. Malik's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The man turned, walking back into the darkness, leaving only footprints in the wet soil. Harlan exhaled slowly. "They've found you," he said. "This isn't over." That night, Malik realized something deep. The truth wasn't just something you spoke. It was something you protected even when it made you a target. And as he lay awake beside his father, listening to the forest's whispers, one thought burned in his young mind. "I won't be quiet again. Not ever." The wind outside howled softly through the trees like a warning carried by the night that the next day would test them in ways they could never imagine. Morning came cold and gray. Mist covered the trees outside the safe house, curling through the branches like quiet ghosts. James didn't sleep all night. Every creak of the cabin made him tense, every rustle outside made his heart jump. He stood by the window, eyes fixed on the empty dirt road leading into the woods. It had been 2 days since the strange man appeared in the dark. Since then, nothing. No calls, no letters, no news. But James had lived long enough to know that silence often came before the storm. Malik stirred awake on the couch, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, are we going home today?" he asked sleepily. James smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed on the window. "Not yet, son. Soon maybe, when it's safe." Just then, Harlan stepped out of the back room, his badge hanging loosely from his neck. He carried a tablet with new information. "We traced the offshore account," he said, his tone serious. "It leads to the board chairman. The man who owns the company you work for, James." James blinked, shocked. "The chairman? But he's the one who—" Harlan nodded. "Yes, he's the one who stood on TV praising your son for saving lives. And he's the same man who ordered the device placed under his own CEO's car." Malik's small voice broke the silence. "Why would someone do that?" "He's already rich." Harlan looked at him grimly. "Because power and greed never stop growing, son. Some people aren't satisfied with being on top. They want to own the world's sympathy, too." He wanted to appear as a victim, collect billions in compensation, and vanish before anyone learned the truth. James sank into a chair, stunned. "And now that we know, he wants to erase us." Harlan nodded once. "Exactly. And I think he's moving now." Before James could respond, the lights flickered. The generator outside sputtered once, then died. The safe house plunged into silence. Malik's small hand gripped his father's arm. "Dad," he whispered. Harlan drew his gun instantly, eyes sharp. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." He motioned for them to move toward the back of the cabin. Outside, the crunch of footsteps echoed faintly. Slow, deliberate, circling. James felt his stomach twist. "They found us," he breathed, a shadow past the window. Then another. The sound of tires on gravel followed. A black SUV stopping just beyond the trees. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a long coat. Even from a distance, James recognized him. Mr. Grant, the company chairman himself. His expensive shoes crunched on dead leaves as he walked closer, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Harlan hissed under his breath. "Stay inside. Lock the door. If I say run, run." He stepped out onto the porch, gun raised. "Stop right there, Grant," he shouted. Grant smiled coldly. "Chief Harlan. Always loyal, aren't you? Tell me, how much is that loyalty worth these days?" His voice carried smoothly, calm as poison. "This ends now," Harlan said. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud." Grant laughed softly, shaking his head. "You think your little report will survive long enough to matter? The system belongs to men like me, not you." He raised his hand and his guards drew weapons. Inside the cabin, Malik peeked through the window, his heart hammering. "Dad, he's got guns." James pulled him back, whispering, "Stay down." But his eyes were fierce, the same quiet courage that once made him stand between bullies and his son at school. He looked around the small room, the mop, the broom, the metal bucket, tools of his humble job. Yet at that moment they were all he had. Outside, the standoff grew tense. Harlan shouted, "Drop it!" One of Grant's men fired first. A single sharp crack split the air. Harlan dove for cover, bullets shattering wood and glass. Malik screamed as the window exploded beside them. James pulled him under the table again, heart racing. Then something inside James snapped. Fear turned into fire. He crawled toward the fallen lamp, grabbed its metal base and whispered, "Stay here, Malik." Before his son could stop him, James slipped out the back door and moved through the side of the cabin, using the smoke and noise as cover. Grant was shouting orders, his voice proud and cruel. "Burn it if you have to." "No one leaves!" James moved fast, silent as a shadow. He picked up a loose piece of wood from the stack beside the porch and waited for the right moment. When one guard stepped too close, James swung hard. The crack of impact echoed through the clearing. The guard dropped instantly. James grabbed the man's gun, his hands trembling, heart pounding. Grant turned, stunned to see the quiet cleaner standing there, aiming straight at him. "You," he spat. "You think you can stop me?" James's voice shook, but his words were strong. "I don't think. I know." The second guard lunged, but Harlan fired first. The man fell, his weapon clattering onto the porch. Grant stumbled back, fury flashing across his face. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I made this company. I made everything you have." James took a slow step forward. "No," he said softly, "you made nothing. You took. My son gave." Before Grant could raise his weapon, Harlan tackled him to the ground. The fight was short. The sound of handcuffs clicking was louder than any gunfire. Minutes later, backup arrived. Police cars flooded the road, red and blue lights painting the trees. Malik ran out and threw himself into his father's arms. James hugged him tightly, the weight of everything finally breaking loose in a flood of tears. It was over. The man who thought he owned truth had been defeated, not by wealth, not by power, but by the courage of a boy who shouted when everyone else stayed silent. As the dawn broke over the trees, Harlan looked at Malik and said, "You've done more than save a company, kid. You saved its soul." And for the first time in days, Malik smiled. Small, tired, but bright, like the first sunrise after a long, dark night.